Let's get to it. Number 10. The Pyramid Code. Imagine you are a time traveler. You stand on the scorched sands of Giza in 2500 BC, looking up at a geometric mountain of limestone designed to launch a pharaoh's soul into the stars. Now you blink. You are instantly transported 3,000 years into the future and 7,000 miles across the ocean to the jungles of Central America. You look up. You see the exact same silhouette cutting against the sky. Different people, different language, different era. Yet they are building the exact same resurrection machine. The parallels between the ancient Egyptians and the Mayan and Aztec civilizations are so precise they make historians sweat. We aren't just talking about the shape. A pile of rocks naturally forms a pyramid. That's simple physics. We are talking about the intent. Both cultures aligned these massive structures with surgical precision to the cardinal points and specific constellations, often Orion or the Pleiades. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. Meanwhile, the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan is oriented to mark the passage of the sun from dawn to dusk. Both civilizations used these structures as royal tombs and temples. Both developed complex writing systems, both were obsessed with the immortality of the soul, and both independently developed a calendar system more accurate than the one we use in Europe today. The architectural blueprints are eerily similar, right down to the stepped construction found in Djoser's Pyramid and El Castillo. The standard archaeological explanation is convergent evolution. Basically, when humans need to build high, they build wide bases. When they look at the sky, they map the same stars. It's not a conspiracy, it's just gravity and geometry. But that explanation feels a little too convenient for the spiritual coincidences. Why did both cultures decide that the only way to talk to the gods was to build a stone mountain that mirrored the stars? Number 9. The Megalithic Puzzle. CC 1400 AD versus CC 20 BC. You were standing at the base of a wall, but this isn't a brick wall. It is a puzzle made of stones the size of small houses. You try to slide a piece of paper between the joints, but you can't. There is no mortar, no glue. Just massive, irregular polygons locked together so tightly they have survived earthquakes that leveled modern concrete buildings. You are in Peru. Or wait, are you in Italy? Or Japan? Or Egypt? The problem is you could be in any of them, and the wall would look exactly the same. This is the megalithic puzzle. At the fortress of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the Inca moved limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons. They cut them into irregular, jigsaw puzzle shapes that interlock in 3 dimensions. Across the world, in the Roman ruins of Baalbek, Lebanon, we find the trilithon. Stones weighing 800 tons raised 20 feet into the air. In Egypt's Valley Temple, the granite blocks are fitted with the same complex mortar-free polygonal style found in the Andes. The engineering challenge here is staggering. To move an 800-ton stone today requires specialized hydraulic cranes that take weeks to assemble. The ancients did this without the wheel, without iron tools, and without modern mathematics. Yet the specific aesthetic style, the puffy face stones, the nubs left on the bottom, the metal clamps to use to hold them internally, appears globally, separated by oceans and millennia. Skeptics argue that with unlimited manpower and centuries of time, you can achieve anything. Pounding stone on stone is slow, but it works. The polygonal shape is actually great for earthquake resistance, which explains why different cultures adopted it. But manpower doesn't explain the methodology. If these cultures never met, why did they all decide to solve the problem of heavy lifting in the exact same impossible way? Number 8. The Mystery of the God's Handbag. C. 9600 BC. Walk through a museum of ancient art, and you'll notice something odd. A figure carved into a pillar in Turkey 12,000 years ago. A relief of a winged genie in ancient Assyria. A massive stone monument from the Olmecs in Mexico. They are all gods, or at least powerful beings. They are all distinct in style and dress. But look at their hands. They are all holding the exact same accessory. It looks like a designer purse, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is the mystery of the God's Handbag. At Göbekli Tepe, The oldest temple on Earth, Pillar 43 clearly depicts 3 handbags sitting along the top row. Fast forward thousands of years to ancient Mesopotamia, and the Apkallu, the 7 sages, are carved holding a pine cone in one hand and this square-bottomed, arched-handled bag in the other. Cross the Atlantic to the Levanta site in Mexico, and you find the Olmec Monument 19 depicting a figure holding the identical object. Even the Maori of New Zealand have myths involving baskets of knowledge brought down from the heavens. The shape is consistent: a flat bottom, a curved-handled top, held casually by the most powerful entities in the pantheon. It appears in cultures that, according to our timeline of history, had absolutely no business speaking to one another. Historians suggest these are sechula, ritual buckets for carrying holy water or seeds, symbolizing fertility in agriculture. It's a container, the most basic human tool. But the uniformity is haunting. If it's just a bucket, why does every god hold it like a badge of office? It looks less like a basket of seeds and more like a piece of technology they didn't want to leave behind. Number 7. The Global Flood Myth, c. 10,000 BC. Close your eyes and picture the end of the world. Not a nuclear war or a zombie plague, but water. A wall of water so high it swallows the mountains. A storm that drowns the cries of humanity, leaving only silence and a vast flat ocean. This is the oldest nightmare of our species. And the terrifying part isn't that it's a story we tell. It's that every single one of our ancestors, no matter where they lived, told the exact same lie. Or was it a lie? The Great Flood is the most ubiquitous myth in human history. We all know Noah and his ark from the Hebrew Bible, but centuries before Genesis was written, the Sumerians wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a man named Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a giant boat to escape a flood sent to destroy mankind. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, the first man, who is warned by a fish to build a ship to survive a deluge. The Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Inca all had flood legends involving a select few survivors. The Gunyu myth in China describes a great flood that lasted for 2 generations. The indigenous tribes of North America, the Aboriginal Australians, and the Vikings all have their own version. The details, sending out birds to find land, the boat resting on a mountain peak, are suspiciously consistent across isolated continents. Historians suggest these are local floods, but if these were local floods, why is the narrative arc identical? It suggests that at one point, humanity wasn't scattered, we were all standing together watching the water rise.
Number 6. The Elongated Skull Practice, circa 800 BC. We are hardwired to modify our bodies. We get tattoos, we pierce our ears, we lift weights. But imagine looking at your newborn child and deciding that their head is the wrong shape. Imagine binding their skull with wooden boards and tight cloth day after day, year after year, forcing the bone to grow upward into an elongated cone. This wasn't torture, it was the ultimate status symbol. The question is, who were they trying to look like? This is the phenomenon of artificial cranial deformation. The most famous examples come from the Paracas culture on the coast of Peru, dating back 3,000 years. Their skulls are incredibly elongated, some with cranial volumes larger than the average modern human. But they weren't the only ones. The Huns, who swept across Europe, practiced this. The Chinook tribes of North America did it. The Mangbetu people of the Congo did it. Ancient Egyptian depictions of Akhenaten and his family show similarly distended skulls. We are talking about diverse cultures, separated by vast oceans and unrelated languages, all deciding that the elite human form, the shape of royalty and divinity, was a long, cylindrical head. It is a painful, dangerous, and long-term process that requires total cultural commitment. Anthropologists explain this as a marker of group identity, a way to separate the nobility from the peasants. It makes you look taller, more imposing. It's fashion, just taken to an extreme. But why that specific shape? Why did kings and queens across the globe conclude that to look like a god, you had to look like, well, that? Number 5. The Universal Serpent God, circa 1200 BC. In the animal kingdom, the snake is the enemy. It is venomous, silent, and deadly. Primates are evolutionarily programmed to fear it. Yet, if you look at the pantheons of the ancient world, the serpent isn't a villain. It is the supreme teacher. It is the bringer of civilization. Why did our ancestors worship the one thing that should have made them run for the hills? The universal serpent is everywhere. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs, Kukulkan to the Mayans, was the deity who brought wind, rain, and knowledge to humanity. In ancient Egypt, the Uraeus cobra sat on the brow of the pharaoh, symbolizing divine authority and the goddess Wadjet. In India, the Nagas are semi-divine serpent beings that guard treasure and knowledge. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent is the one who offers the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The symbol of medicine we use today, the rod of Asclepius, is a snake wrapped around a staff. In ancient China, Nuhua and Fuhi, the creators of mankind, are depicted with human upper bodies and intertwined serpent tails, nearly identical to the structure of DNA. Scholars say the snake represents rebirth because it sheds its skin. It lives in the earth close to the underworld, making it a natural bridge between life and death. It's a potent metaphor. But the specific recurrence of the flying serpent or feathered serpent is odd. Snakes don't fly. So what exactly were our ancestors looking at in the sky that they described as a dragon?
Number 4. The pinecone symbolism, circa 850 BC. Take a walk through the Vatican. You'll see statues of saints, crucifixes, and a giant bronze pinecone, 4 meters high. It's the largest pinecone statue in the world. It seems like a random choice of decor for the seat of Christendom. But then you look at the staff of the Egyptian god Osiris. There's a pinecone on top. You look at the carvings of the Sumerian gods. They are holding pine cones. Why is this humble seed pod the secret handshake of the ancient elite? The pine cone is one of the most mysterious recurring symbols in art history. In Assyrian carvings, the winged genies point a pine cone at the tree of life, as if using it to fertilize or unlock power. The Greek god Dionysus carried a staff topped with a pine cone. The Hindu deities are often depicted with a pine cone-like hairstyle or holding similar objects. The link here is biological. The pine cone is an ancient symbol of human enlightenment because it represents the pineal gland, a tiny pine cone-shaped organ in the center of our human brain. The ancients called it the third eye. The French philosopher Descartes called it the seat of the soul. Skeptics argue it's just a symbol of regeneration. Pine trees are evergreens. They don't die in winter. The cone holds seeds. It represents life. It's simple nature worship. But how did ancient cultures, without microscopes or modern anatomy, know that there was a tiny gland in the center of our brain that looked exactly like a pine cone, and that this gland was linked to our perception of light? Number 3. The worldwide swastika, circa 10,000 BC. I need you to erase the last 80 years of history from your mind. Forget the Nazis, forget the hate. If you go back 3,000 years, the swastika was not a symbol of evil. It was the most positive, universal symbol of good fortune on the planet. You could walk from Greece to India to Arizona, and you would see this spinning cross, carved into temples, woven into baskets, and painted on shields. The word swastika comes from Sanskrit, meaning conducive to well-being. In Hinduism and Buddhism, it has been a sacred symbol for millennia, representing the eternal cycle of birth and rebirth. But it's not just Asian. We find the swastika on ancient Greek pottery from 700 BC. We find it in the mosaic floors of ancient Roman villas. We find it in the whirling log symbol of the Navajo people in North America. We find it on Celtic artifacts, and even on artifacts from the Bronze Age in Europe. It is a solar symbol, often representing the sun's path across the sky or the rotation of the Big Dipper around the North Star. It appears in cultures that had no contact with the Vedic traditions of India, yet they used the exact same geometric logic. Geometrists will tell you it's a simple pattern. If you try to weave a basket, you naturally create this shape. It's a cross with moving arms. It's easy to draw. But the fact that it always means good luck, life, or sun suggests it's not just a doodle. It's a shared memory of a celestial clock that everyone was watching. Number 2. The terrifying practice of trepanation, circa 6500 BC. You have a migraine, a bad one. You go to the doctor. He tells you the only way to let the demons out is to take a sharp stone and scrape a hole in your skull until he exposes your brain. You were awake for this. And the craziest part? You survive. You live for another 20 years. This sounds like a horror movie, but for thousands of years, this was the cutting edge of medical science. This is trepanation, the oldest surgical procedure in the world. We have found trepan skulls in Neolithic France dating back to 6500 BC. We find them in ancient Greece, but the practice reached its zenith in Peru, where archaeologists have found hundreds of skulls with perfectly healed surgical holes. The survival rate in the Inca Empire was shockingly high, up to 80 to 90% in later periods. The bone regrowth proves these patients lived for years after the surgery. We find similar skulls in Russia, China, and North Africa. These cultures use different tools: obsidian, flint, bronze, but the procedure and the anatomical knowledge required to avoid killing the patient were identical. Medical historians say this was likely used to treat head trauma, relieving pressure from a skull fracture. It's practical. It works. But how did a shaman in the Peruvian Andes and a doctor in ancient France figure out the exact same sterilizing and surgical techniques to breach the human skull without causing fatal infection? It suggests a medical manual that was shared, then lost. Number 1. The staff god figure, circa 9600 BC. There is a pose, a stance of power. Once you recognize it, you will see it everywhere. A figure standing front and center, knees slightly bent, elbows out, and in each hand clutched tight a staff or a serpent. It is the posture of the master of animals. It is the icon of the one who controls the chaos, and it seems to be the one image that the ancient world simply could not forget. In the Andes, this is the staff god. The most famous example is Viracocha, carved into the gate of the sun at Tiwanaku in Bolivia. He stands frontally, holding two staffs, surrounded by winged figures. This motif dominates the Chavin and Wari cultures. Now, travel 12,000 years back in time to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. On Pillar 56, we see a nearly identical figure, squatting, frontal, holding a staff-like object in each hand. We see echoes of this in the Master of Animals motif in ancient Mesopotamia and Greece. The composition is rigid and specific. It is not a casual drawing. It is a specific iconographic blueprint that survived the end of the Ice Age and reappeared on the other side of the world. Art historians call this symmetry. Symmetrical figures look powerful and stable. Humans have two hands. Putting a weapon in each is a natural display of strength. It's just good design. But the staff god isn't just a design. It feels like a portrait of a figure so influential that 12,000 years later, we are still carving his statue, even if we've forgotten his name.
15 ancient civilizations more terrifying than your nightmares. Let's get to it. Number 15. The Zapotec civilization. Imagine a ritual. The air is thick with the smoke of burning copal, and the rhythmic chant of priests echoes off stone walls. A figure emerges, adorned in brilliant red feathers and shimmering gold. But as it moves into the firelight, you notice something is wrong. The skin seems ill-fitting, loose. There's a second layer underneath, and the face is a grotesque mask. This isn't just a costume. It is a man wearing the freshly flayed skin of another human being. Welcome to the world of the Zapotec and their god of renewal, Xipe Totec, our Lord, the Flayed One. This Mesoamerican deity, also worshipped by the Toltecs and Aztecs who came later, was a god of agriculture, spring, and rebirth. To honor him and to ensure a bountiful harvest, a truly horrific ceremony was required. During the festival of Telekaksipewalisli, or the flaying of men, priests would sacrifice war captives, often through heart extraction. Then they would carefully flay the victim, removing the skin in one large piece. This skin, dyed yellow and called the golden clothes, was then worn by another priest for 20 days. The act was meant to symbolize a seed shedding its outer husk before germination, or a snake shedding its skin. It was a gruesome prayer for new life, written in blood and flesh. The rational explanation is that this was a deeply symbolic religious act. Xipe Totec himself was said to have flayed his own skin to feed humanity, so this was an act of imitation, not malice, a way of participating in the brutal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all life. But knowing the logic behind it doesn't make it any less terrifying. It simply raises a more profound question. What does it say about a civilization when their holiest act of creation requires you to become a monster? Number 14, the Toltec Empire. You are walking through the capital of a powerful empire. The art here is unsettling. Stone carvings depict colossal serpents not just slithering, but actively devouring human hearts. Statues of reclining warriors hold bowls on their stomachs, waiting for an offering you'd rather not think about. And then you see the wall. It's not made of stone, but of skulls. Hundreds upon hundreds of human skulls carved with terrifying precision, staring out with empty eyes in a permanent, silent scream. The Toltecs were the precursors to the Aztecs, and they laid the groundwork for much of their infamous brutality. Their capital at Tula is a gallery of horrors. Their art is dominated by images of predators like jaguars, coyotes, and eagles devouring human hearts, a clear statement of their martial ideology. But their most fearsome architectural innovation was the Tzompantli. This was a massive skull rack used to display the heads of sacrificial victims. While the Aztecs would perfect the use of real skulls, the Toltecs built monumental stone walls carved with row after row of skulls, a permanent testament to their sacrificial cult. These structures, along with the reclining Chacmol statues designed to hold the hearts of the sacrificed, broadcast a clear message. This was an empire built on death, fed by blood, and it had an insatiable appetite. From a political perspective, the Tzompantli was a brilliant tool of psychological warfare. It was a billboard advertising the power of the state and the futility of resistance. It was state-sponsored terror designed to keep subjects and enemies in a constant state of fear. But it also reveals a chilling truth about power. We tell ourselves that civilization is a process of taming our worst instincts. But what if the opposite is true? What if civilization is simply the process of organizing our horrors on a grander, more terrifying scale? Number 13, the Kalinga Kingdom. He was a conqueror, the grandson of a legendary empire builder. He commanded a vast army and had a reputation for ruthlessness. His next target was a prosperous kingdom, and he marched upon it with overwhelming force. The battle was a foregone conclusion, a brutal but simple affair of statecraft. But when the dust settled and the emperor walked the battlefield, something inside him broke. The sheer scale of the carnage that he had unleashed was so absolute, it didn't just win him a kingdom, it shattered his mind. This was the Kalinga War, fought around 261 BCE between the Mauryan Empire under Emperor Ashoka and the independent kingdom of Kalinga. Kalinga was a prosperous state with powerful trade routes, and Ashoka sought to bring it under his control. The battle was one of the largest and deadliest in Indian history. Ashoka's own rock edicts, the historical record of his reign, state that 100,000 Kalingans were killed in the fighting, 150,000 were deported, and many more perished from disease and starvation in the aftermath. Confronted by this apocalyptic landscape of death, the sheer, unimaginable suffering that he had caused, Ashoka had a complete psychological and spiritual breakdown. The man who had been a ruthless conqueror was gone, replaced by something entirely new. Overwhelmed by remorse, Ashoka renounced all violence and converted to Buddhism, dedicating the rest of his reign to a policy of Dhamma, or moral law. He became one of history's greatest patrons of peace. It's a powerful story of redemption, proof that even the hardest heart can be changed. But it leaves us with a haunting question. We celebrate Ashoka's transformation, but at what cost did it come? How much blood has to be spilled before a monster finally looks in the mirror?
Number 12. The Teotihuacan civilization. Imagine a city without a king, not a democracy, but a metropolis of giants, home to 100,000 people, dominated by pyramids the size of mountains. For centuries, archaeologists believe this city, Teotihuacan, was a peaceful center of commerce and religion. They found no evidence of a royal dynasty, no portraits of warrior kings. It seemed to be an exception in the brutal history of Mesoamerica. And then they started digging inside the pyramids. Deep within the foundations of Teotihuacan's monumental structures, like the Pyramid of the Moon and the Feathered Serpent Pyramid, a much darker story emerged. These were not just temples. They were tombs built on blood. Excavations have revealed evidence of massive, ritualized human sacrifices performed to dedicate the buildings. One burial vault in the Moon Pyramid contained 12 bodies, 10 of which were decapitated. Many victims were found with their hands bound behind their backs. Another burial associated with the Feathered Serpent Pyramid contained the remains of around 200 individuals, many of whom were identified as foreign warriors, likely captured in battle. They weren't just killed, they were systematically arranged, some adorned with necklaces of human jaws, turning their very bones into a statement of the city's power. The logical explanation is that these were dedication rituals, a way of feeding the gods and sanctifying these immense structures to ensure the city's prosperity. It was a public spectacle, a brutal performance of state power at the heart of their ceremonial landscape. But it shatters the image of a peaceful city. Teotihuacan didn't lack kings because it was enlightened. It hid them. Its power was so absolute, so baked into the very stones of the city, that it didn't need a face. What's more terrifying, a tyrant on a throne or a tyranny with no one in charge? Number 11. The Nazca culture. You're a warrior, captured in battle on the arid plains of ancient Peru. You know your end is near, but it won't be quick. Your captors are meticulous. After they kill you, they will carefully slice the head from your body. With a sharp obsidian knife, they will drill a hole in your forehead, remove your brain and soft tissue through the base of your skull, and then pin your lips shut with the spine of a cactus. You are not just being killed, you are being remade. The Nazca people are famous for drawing gigantic lines in the desert, but they had a far more personal and gruesome art form, the creation of trophy heads. These were not simply the severed heads of enemies, they were ritual objects that had been deliberately modified. After severing the head, A hole was drilled in the forehead to attach a rope for carrying or display. The base of the skull was often broken away to remove the brain, and the resulting cavity was stuffed with cloth or vegetable matter. The lips were then pinned shut. While the name trophy head suggests they were spoils of war, their primary purpose seems to have been ritualistic. They appear frequently in Nazca art, often associated with agriculture and fertility, and have been buried in caches, suggesting they were powerful religious offerings. Anthropologists believe that for the Nazca, the head was the vessel of life force and power. By taking and transforming a head, they weren't just killing an enemy. They were harnessing their spirit for the good of the community, turning a vessel of life into a tool for ensuring their own survival. This adds a layer of spiritual significance to the horror, but it begs a chilling question. If your culture believes that the only way to ensure a good harvest is to desecrate the dead, how long before you start seeing every living person as a potential ghost? Number 10. The Mongol Empire. The terms of surrender are simple, delivered by an envoy from the approaching army. You have 1 day. A white tent is pitched outside your city walls. If you surrender while the white tent flies, your people will be spared and folded into the new empire. But if you resist, tomorrow, a red tent will be raised. If the red tent flies, every man in the city will be put to the sword. If you still resist, a third tent will appear, a black tent, and that means everyone and everything dies. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols perfected a brutal but chillingly effective form of psychological warfare. Their policy was simple: surrender or die. Before attacking a city, they would offer terms. Those who submitted immediately were generally spared, their artisans and engineers assimilated, their rulers left in place as vassals, and their people required to pay tribute. However, for any city that refused this single chance, the consequences were apocalyptic. The Mongols would employ a strategy of total war, ordering the collective slaughter of the entire population. When they took cities like Samarkand, Urgench, or Merv, they didn't just conquer them, they erased them, systematically executing men, women, and children until no one was left breathing. This wasn't random violence, it was policy, a well-tested tactic to ensure the next city would not dare resist. From a strategic standpoint, this policy was ruthlessly logical. With a relatively small army conquering a vast territory, the Mongols couldn't afford long, costly sieges. Terror was their most efficient weapon. The mountains of skulls left at one city were an advertisement for surrender to the next. It was a calculated strategy of conquest by capitulation. But this cold logic only makes the horror more profound. It reveals that the greatest atrocities in history are often not the product of madness, but of reason.
Number 9. The Huns under Attila. To the terrified citizens of the crumbling Roman Empire, they seemed to come from nowhere. Nomadic horsemen from the vast unknown steppes of the East. They lived on their horses, fought on their horses, and brought a storm of violence that seemed less like war and more like a force of nature. Their leader was not seen as a king or a general, but as a divine punishment, a title he wore with pride, Flagellum Dei, the scourge of God. Attila the Hun didn't just lead an army, he led a migratory wave of destruction. For 2 decades in the 5th century AD, he carved a path of terror across Europe, from the Black Sea to France. The Huns were masters of the lightning raid, sacking and pillaging cities with a ferocity that left even the battle-hardened Romans in shock. They extorted massive tributes of gold from the Eastern Roman Empire simply to not attack. Roman chroniclers described them as barbarians who left nothing but devastation in their wake, giving rise to the saying, "Where Attila has passed, no grass grows."
Their conquests were so brutal and seemingly indiscriminate that for the Christian Romans there was only one possible explanation. This was a punishment sent from heaven. Historians argue that Attila was actually a shrewd politician, not a mindless destroyer. His campaigns were not random, they were calculated acts of political and economic extortion. He used terror as a tool to build an empire that for a brief time stretched across Central Europe. His ultimate goal wasn't just to burn the world, but to rule it. Yet this rational explanation feels insufficient. It doesn't capture the sheer elemental terror he inspired, a fear so profound that it outlived his short-lived empire and made his name synonymous with destruction itself. Number 8. The Shang Dynasty. The king is dead. For the hundreds of servants, concubines, soldiers, and artisans who served him in his palace, this is not just a time of mourning. It is the end. As the monarch's body is lowered into his massive tomb, surrounded by precious bronze vessels and jade ornaments, they are led down the ramps into the darkness. They are not there to pay their respects. They are there to join him, and they will not be returning to the world of the living. In ancient China, during the Shang dynasty, the death of a king was a mass casualty event. Excavations at Yinzhou, the final Shang capital, have unearthed sprawling royal tombs that reveal the dynasty's chilling penchant for human sacrifice, a practice known as Ren Shun. When a king died, his entire retinue was often killed and buried with him. The tomb of Lady Fuha, a powerful consort and general, contained the remains of 16 human sacrifices alongside her coffin. Larger royal tombs contained hundreds. These weren't just burials, they were gruesome spectacles. Oracle bone inscriptions record sacrifices involving hundreds of captives at a time, many of whom were beheaded. One excavation revealed 22 severed skulls lining a single tomb passage. In total, archaeologists estimate over 13,000 people were sacrificed at Yinzhou alone. The belief system was straightforward. The king needed his court to serve him in the afterlife just as they had in life. This was also a brutal display of power, proving the king's authority extended beyond the grave. It was a tool of social control, reinforcing a rigid hierarchy where the lives of commoners were utterly disposable. Yet it leads to a dark thought about society. We think of our world as built on laws and institutions, but the Shang reveal a more fundamental truth. All power, in its most naked form, is the power over who lives and who dies. Number 7. The Ancient Celts or Gauls. You are a guest in the home of a powerful Celtic warrior. He is showing you his most prized possession. It is not a finely crafted sword or a golden torque. It is a wooden chest. He opens it, and the smell of cedar oil fills the air. Inside, resting on a cloth, is a human head. It is perfectly preserved, the face of a long-dead enemy staring back at you. The warrior tells you with great pride that his ancestors refused a fortune in gold for this specific trophy. For the ancient Celts, the head was everything. They believed it was the seat of the soul, the center of emotion, and a symbol of divinity. This obsession manifested in a practice that horrified their Greek and Roman contemporaries: headhunting. In battle, Celtic warriors would decapitate their most distinguished enemies and attach the heads to the necks of their horses. Back home, they would nail these trophies to their houses. For the most important enemies, they developed a form of embalming. Classical writers like Diodorus Siculus described how the Celts would preserve heads in cedar oil, keeping them in chests to be displayed to strangers as a testament to their prowess. Archaeological finds have confirmed this, revealing skulls with cut marks from decapitation and traces of conifer resin used as a preservative. This wasn't just about battlefield savagery. It was a deeply spiritual act. By taking an enemy's head, a warrior believed he was capturing their soul, absorbing their power, and preventing their ghost from seeking revenge. It was both a trophy and a talisman. But this belief system creates a disturbing paradox. If the only way to truly defeat an enemy is to steal their soul, does victory make you a hero, or does it simply turn you into the keeper of 1,000 angry ghosts? Number 6. The Chimu Kingdom. It was a ceremony on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The procession was not of warriors, but of children, accompanied by young llamas. They were led to a place prepared for them, a site made sacred by the wet, muddy earth. One by one, their chests were cut open, their hearts were removed. This wasn't an act of war or a punishment for a crime. It was a sacrifice, and it was the largest single event of its kind the world has ever seen. In 2011, at a site in Peru known as Huanchaquito Las Lamas, archaeologists uncovered the grim legacy of the Chimu Kingdom. Here, around the year 1450, this pre-Incan culture performed the largest known mass child sacrifice in history. The remains of more than 140 children, aged between 5 and 14, were found alongside 200 juvenile llamas. Skeletal analysis shows that both the children and the animals were systematically killed by a transverse cut across the sternum, likely to extract their heart. Many of the children's faces were smeared with a red pigment, indicating a highly ritualized event. The children were buried facing the sea, while the llamas faced the Andes. The entire site was covered by a thick layer of mud, suggesting the sacrifice may have been a desperate response to a catastrophic weather event, possibly related to El Niño. The scientific explanation is that this was a desperate, large-scale offering to the gods, an attempt to stop the devastating floods that were destroying their agricultural society. It was the ultimate sacrifice, offering up their most precious resource, their future, to appease the supernatural forces they believed controlled their world. It is a chilling reminder of how terrified people can be driven to unthinkable acts. But what God, anywhere in the universe, would answer such a prayer? Number 5. The Scythian Nomads. Imagine a warrior on horseback, a blur of motion and violence on the vast Eurasian steppe. He closes in on his enemy, and with a swift blow, the man falls. The warrior dismounts. This is the first man he has killed today, and tradition demands a tribute. He cuts his throat and drinks his blood. Later, he will take his skull and fashion it into a drinking cup. He will take his scalp and use it as a napkin, or perhaps sew it into a magnificent cloak made of hundreds of such trophies. The Scythians were a nomadic people who dominated the steppes from the 9th to the 2nd century BCE, and their reputation for ferocity was legendary, thanks largely to the detailed, if horrified, accounts of the Greek historian Herodotus. According to him, Scythian warriors had a host of terrifying rituals. A warrior had to drink the blood of the first enemy he killed. They were renowned for collecting scalps, which they would attach to their horses' bridles as proof of their kills. The more scalps a man had, the greater his prestige. The most elaborate trophies were cloaks made from the stitched-together scalps of their foes. And for their most hated enemies, a special fate was reserved. Their skulls would be sawn off below the eyebrows, cleaned out, and lined with gold to be used as ceremonial drinking cups. To the Greeks, this was the pinnacle of barbarism. But for the Scythians, these acts were deeply embedded in their social and military structure. They were a way of recording kills, establishing rank, and terrifying their enemies. In a harsh world without written records, a man's reputation was literally written on his body and his belongings, in the blood and bone of his enemies. It's a brutal logic, born of a brutal landscape, but it forces us to ask, when survival is the only morality, is there any room left for humanity? Number 4. The Carthaginian Empire. It is a sacred place, an open-air enclosure under the North African sky. But it's not a temple in the way we understand it. It is a graveyard, filled with thousands of small urns buried over centuries. Each urn contains the cremated hashes and bone fragments of a child. Stone markers, or stelae, are inscribed not with eulogies, but with vows and pleas for blessings to the gods. This was not a place of mourning. It was a place of transaction, and the currency were the lives of infants. The civilization of Carthage, Rome's great rival, stands accused of one of history's most horrific practices: systematic, large-scale child sacrifice. The primary evidence comes from both the horrified accounts of their Greek and Roman enemies and the chilling archaeology of a site known as the Tophet. Here, archaeologists have uncovered an estimated 20,000 urns containing the cremated remains of infants, mostly newborns just a few months old. Many of these urns also contain the remains of animals, suggesting lambs were sometimes used as substitutes, which implies that the children were not. Inscriptions on the stelae don't mention death, but instead make vows to the gods Baal-Hamon and Tanit. The rate of burials seems to skyrocket during times of crisis, suggesting the city turned to its darkest ritual when it was most desperate. Modern skeptics and some historians argued the Tophet was simply a special cemetery for infants who died of natural causes, and that the stories of sacrifice were propaganda spread by Carthage's enemies. This theory, however, struggles to explain the votive inscriptions and the presence of animal remains. The debate rages on, but if the traditional interpretation is true, it presents a terrifying picture of a society that believed the path to divine favor was paved with the bones of its own children. Which is the more chilling thought? That Carthage's enemies lied, or that they were telling the terrible truth?
Number 3. The Spartan State. You are a newborn infant in one of the most powerful city-states in the ancient world. But your first test is not of strength or intellect. It is a pass-fail exam of your physical perfection. Elders of the state inspect your tiny body for any sign of weakness or deformity. If you are deemed unfit, you will not be raised. You will be taken to a nearby chasm, a place called the Apathete, and left to die from exposure. Your life has just begun, and it has already been judged forfeit. The entire Spartan society was an engine designed for one purpose: to create the perfect soldier. This process began at birth. According to the historian Plutarch, newborn males were examined by a council of elders. Those deemed weak or imperfect were exposed and left to die. If a boy survived this first call, his real ordeal began at age 7, when he was taken from his family and entered the agoge. This was a brutal, state-sponsored military training program that would last for over a decade. Boys were kept perpetually hungry, taught to steal food, and beaten if caught. They were forced to go barefoot, sleep on beds of reeds, and endure constant physical hardship and violent competition to weed out the weak and forge them into instruments of war. Sparta's logic was one of extreme pragmatism. They were a small ruling class living in constant fear of a massive slave or helot population. Their survival depended on creating a military force so disciplined and so feared that rebellion was unthinkable. The agoge was the furnace that forged this weapon. But in their obsession with creating the perfect warrior, they created a society that had to sacrifice everything we would call humanity. It makes you wonder, what is the point of creating the perfect guardians for a city that is no longer worth guarding? Number 2. The Neo-Assyrian Empire. The king wishes to commemorate his victory. He does not commission a triumphant arch or a celebratory poem. Instead, he orders his scribes to record the following: I built a pillar against his city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. I cut off the limbs of the officers. Many captives from among them I burned with fire. From some I cut off their noses, their ears, and their fingers. Of many I put out the eyes. This isn't a threat. It is a press release. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, which dominated the Near East from roughly 911 to 609 BCE, were the undisputed masters of psychological warfare.
They didn't just conquer their enemies, they systematically terrorized them into submission. Their preferred methods were legendarily cruel. Flaying their enemies alive was a common practice, with the skins often displayed on city walls as a warning. They recorded mass deportations, impalements, and the creation of gruesome monuments, such as pillars made from human heads. Crucially, this wasn't just battlefield rage. It was calculated state policy, meticulously recorded by royal scribes and, most terrifyingly, depicted in graphic detail on massive stone reliefs that lined the walls of their palaces. An ambassador visiting the king would be forced to walk through a gallery of carved images showcasing exactly what happened to those who defied Assyrian power. The Assyrians understood a fundamental truth about power. The fear of violence can be more effective than violence itself. Their empire was vast and diverse, and they couldn't afford to be putting down rebellions everywhere at once. Their policy of calculated frightfulness was a form of mass communication, a brutal but effective way of maintaining control over a restive population. It was cruelty as a tool of efficiency. This forces a deeply uncomfortable question about governance. Is a society ruled by laws truly more stable than one ruled by nightmares? Number 1. The Aztec Empire. The sun rises over the city of Tenochtitlan. From atop the Great Pyramid, the Templo Mayor, you can see the causeways teeming with people and the canoes gliding across the lake. But you are not here to admire the view. You are on your back, held down by 4 priests on a sacrificial stone. A 5th priest raises a knife of razor-sharp obsidian. He is not aiming for your throat. He is aiming for your chest, because the Son of God is thirsty, and he demands your still-beating heart. While many Mesoamerican cultures practiced human sacrifice, the Aztecs took it to an industrial scale. Their cosmology demanded it. They believed their sun god Huitzilopochtli was in a constant battle against darkness, and he required a steady diet of human hearts and blood to keep the sun moving across the sky. This belief fueled a perpetual state of ritual warfare, where the primary goal was not to kill enemies, but to capture them alive for the sacrificial altar. At the top of their pyramids, a priest would perform the heart extraction. The body was then often rolled down the temple steps where it could be dismembered. The heads of victims were displayed on massive skull racks, or tsampatli. Archaeologists at one rack in Tenochtitlan have found over 600 skulls. From the Aztec perspective, this wasn't murder. It was a vital, sacred duty to prevent the end of the world. The victims were messengers to the gods, and sacrifice was the highest honor one could pay them. It was the metaphysical engine that kept the universe running. But this divine imperative also served the state, justifying imperial expansion and terrorizing their enemies. This perfect fusion of religious belief and state violence created one of history's most terrifying societies. It leaves us with the ultimate question. What is more frightening, a civilization that kills for power or one that kills for God?
Number 10. Ancient stainless steel. Let's start with a glitch in the matrix, a physical object that is currently breaking the laws of thermodynamics. If you leave a piece of iron outside, it rusts. It dies. That is the rule. Entropy comes for everything. But in the middle of a crowded temple complex in India, there is a generic-looking pillar that has been giving the middle finger to Mother Nature for 1,600 years. It stands in the open air, yet it refuses to die. It is a technological anomaly that makes modern engineering look embarrassing. This is the Iron Pillar of Delhi. It was forged around 400 AD. Since then, it has been blasted by monsoon rains, baked by 115-degree heat, and choked by the corrosive smog of a modern megacity. By every metric of material science, it should be a pile of orange dust. But it isn't. It is 98% pure wrought iron, yet it remains pristine. In the 1960s, baffled scientists finally figured out why. The pillar is coated in a passive protective film called misawhite. This film forms because the iron has an insanely high phosphorus content. Why? Because the ancient smiths didn't use limestone to remove impurities like we do today. They used charcoal, and in doing so, they accidentally trapped the phosphorus inside the metal. Here is the humbling part. We spend billions on anti-corrosive sprays and galvanized alloys, and our bridges still rust. The Gupta Empire achieved better results by accident. It forces you to wonder if a civilization 16 centuries ago could accidentally build an eternal metal. What other primitive technologies have we lost that were actually superior to our own? Number 9. Archimedes' Principle. Picture a man stepping into a bathtub in the ancient city of Syracuse. He's stressed, terrified, and mentally exhausted. The local king, Hiero II, has given him an impossible task. Determine if a golden crown is pure gold or if the goldsmith swindled the king by mixing in cheap silver. The catch: the mathematician cannot scratch, melt, or damage the holy object in any way. Failure means the king's wrath. Success seems impossible. He sinks into the warm water, watching the level rise against the side of the tub, his mind drifting until... click. The man was Archimedes, and the moment he watched the water spill over the rim, he realized a fundamental law of physics. He understood that a body immersed in a fluid experiences a buoyant force equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. Since gold is denser than silver, a crown of pure gold would occupy less volume than a mixed crown of the same weight, and thus displace less water. This insight, known as Archimedes' Principle, didn't just solve the king's problem, it laid the groundwork for hydrostatics and naval engineering. We use this accidental bath-time discovery to design steel aircraft carriers that float and submarines that dive. It's the physics that keeps global trade afloat, discovered not in a library, but in a moment of relaxation. Legend says he ran naked through the streets shouting Eureka immediately after. While the naked sprint might be an embellishment, the principle is ironclad. It suggests that the human brain doesn't solve complex problems when it's grinding away at a desk, but when it finally lets go. Maybe the greatest laboratory on Earth isn't at MIT. Maybe it's just a hot bath.
Number 8. Asphalt roads. For thousands of years, the earth bled. In various spots across the Middle East, a thick, foul-smelling black sludge would bubble up from the ground, ruining crops and trapping unsuspecting animals. To the early nomadic tribes, this substance was a curse from the underworld, a sticky, impossible-to-clean mess that signaled bad land. It was waste. It was garbage. But then, an engineer in a rapidly growing city looked at this bubbling nuisance and realized that its most annoying property, its stickiness, was actually the key to building an empire. The Babylonians were the first to truly harness the power of asphalt, or bitumen. Around 600 BCE, under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon didn't just use this black goo for waterproofing boats, they used it to pave the streets. The famous processional way was paved with limestone and brick, bound together with a mortar of bitumen. While the Romans are credited with road building, the Babylonians were chemically welding their infrastructure together centuries earlier. This accidental utilization of a natural petroleum seep created surfaces that could withstand the heavy traffic of chariots, trade caravans, and armies. They turned a geologic defect into the literal foundation of urbanization. Today, 94% of the paved roads in the United States are surfaced with asphalt. We are driving on the exact same material that ancient farmers cursed for ruining their sandals. It makes you wonder, what waste product are we throwing away today that will be the building block of the 31st century? Number 7. Brandy. In the 16th century, a Dutch ship captain stares at his manifest in frustration. Wine is heavy, it is mostly water, and shipping water across the ocean is expensive. It takes up massive amounts of cargo space and often spoils into vinegar before it reaches the port.
the merchants hatch a clever, penny-pinching plan. They will heat the wine to evaporate the water, creating a concentrate that takes up less space. The idea is simply to add water back to the concentrate once they arrive at the destination. It was supposed to be a logistical hack, nothing more. The merchants called this concentrate brandewijn, meaning burnt wine. However, when the shipment arrived, a strange thing happened. The concentrate had been sitting in wooden casks during the voyage, absorbing flavors from the oak. When people tasted the undiluted spirit, they realized it wasn't just a transport method, it was magnificent. The distillation process had intensified the alcohol and the flavor profile, creating something far superior to the original wine. They had accidentally invented brandy. This mistake revolutionized the world alcohol trade, leading to the creation of cognac, armagnac, and the entire industry of aged spirits. The water was never added back. The world's most sophisticated sipping drink wasn't created by a master sommelier trying to please the palate. It was created by a frugal shipping manager trying to save money on freight taxes. It's a sobering reminder. Sometimes the pursuit of profit accidentally yields the height of luxury. Number 6. Silk. The year is roughly 2700 BCE. Empress Lezu, the wife of the Yellow Emperor, sits in a garden in China, enjoying a moment of tranquility under the shade of a mulberry tree. She holds a cup of steaming hot tea. Suddenly, a small hard object plummets from the branches above and splashes directly into her cup. It's a cocoon, a bug casing. Disgusted, she tries to fish the boiled insect out of her beverage. But instead of a soggy lump, she pulls on a loose thread, and the object begins to unravel, and unravel, and unravel. What Lezu pulled from that cup was a continuous filament of silk. The heat of the tea had dissolved the sericin, the sticky protein holding the cocoon together, allowing the single thread to unwind. A single silkworm cocoon can yield a thread up to 900 meters long. Realizing the potential of this strong, shimmering fiber, the Chinese developed sericulture. For thousands of years, the method of silk production was the world's most guarded secret. Revealing it was punishable by death. This accidental tea-time discovery created the Silk Road, a trade network that connected East and West, reshaped global economies, and facilitated the exchange of culture, religion, and disease across continents. Of course, this is partly legend, but the biological mechanism is fact. The most luxurious fabric in human history, synonymous with royalty and wealth, is literally just the dried saliva of a blind, flightless moth larva. We drape ourselves in bug spit and call it fashion. Number 5. Tyrian purple. According to ancient Mediterranean legend, the demigod Hercules was walking along a beach in Phoenicia, trying to impress a nymph named Tyro. His dog, running ahead, found a sea snail on the rocks and crunched down on it. When the dog returned, its muzzle was stained a deep, rich, horrifying crimson purple. The nymph, entranced by the color, told Hercules he would only accept his advances if he made her a garment of that exact shade. The hero, or rather his curious dog, had just stumbled upon the most expensive substance of the ancient world. The substance was Tyrian purple, derived from the glandular secretions of the predatory murex snail. Following this accidental discovery, the city of Tyre became the center of the dye trade. The process was brutal and industrial. It took approximately 12,000 decomposing snails to produce just 1.4 grams of pure dye, enough to trim a single garment. The dye was color-fast, meaning it didn't fade in the sun. It actually became brighter. It was so labor-intensive and rare that it became worth more than its weight in gold. Roman laws eventually forbade anyone but the emperor from wearing it. The color purple became the universal symbol of power, all because a dog bit the wrong seashell. The twist? The production process smelled so agonizingly like rotting flesh that the dye factories had to be located miles downwind of the city. The smell of supreme power was literally the smell of death. It makes you wonder, what is the true cost of the status symbols we worship today? Number 4. Glass. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder tells the story of Phoenician merchants landing on the banks of the Belus River. Exhausted and hungry, they prepare to cook a meal, but the beach is sandy and lacks large stones to prop up their cooking pots. Improvising, the merchants return to their ship and grab blocks of natron, a natural soda ash they're transporting, to use as makeshift pot stands. They build a roaring fire. As the heat intensifies, the merchants notice something magical happening beneath the pots. The beach itself begins to melt. The natron, sodium carbonate, lowered the melting point of the silica sand. As the fire burned, the two substances fused, flowing as a clear liquid stream that hardened into glass. Before this moment, glass existed only as obsidian, volcanic glass, or as a glaze on ceramic beads. This accident unlocked the technology for windows, bottles, lenses, and eventually the fiber optic cables that transmit the internet you are using right now. While modern archaeologists argue that a campfire might not reach the necessary 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit to melt pure sand, the addition of soda ash acts as a flux, making Pliny's account chemically plausible. Skeptics argue the story is a myth because open fires rarely get that hot, but the chemistry of the flux is undeniable. Whether it happened exactly on that beach or in a potter's kiln, the result is the same. Our entire civilization is viewed through a material that is nothing more than melted sand. Number 3. Gunpowder. In the 9th century, China, a group of Taoist alchemists is at hard work. They are not trying to conquer the world, they are trying to leave it. Their goal is the elixir of life, a potion that will grant the emperor eternal immortality. They mix honey, arsenic, saltpeter, and sulfur, experimenting with different ratios in their cauldrons. They heat the mixture, expecting a divine transformation. Instead, they get a flash of light, a deafening boom, and a singed laboratory. They haven't found the cure for death, they have found the cause of it. They called it huayao, or fire medicine. The earliest written records of gunpowder warn alchemists strictly against mixing sulfur, railgar, and saltpeter because it would burn their hands and faces and even burn down the house. Initially used for treating skin diseases and fumigating insects, the mixture was quickly weaponized into flying fire arrows and eventually cannons. The irony is palpable. Men searching for a way to extend life indefinitely accidentally created the single most efficient tool for ending it, changing the nature of warfare from skill-based melee to chemical destruction. The alchemists thought they were manipulating the spiritual energy of the universe. In reality, they were just unlocking the chemical energy of the nitrate bond. It is the ultimate cosmic joke. The search for immortality gave us the gun. What are we researching today to save humanity that will eventually be used to destroy it? Number 2. Cheese. Thousands of years ago, a nomad prepares for a long journey across the desert. He needs nutrition, so he fills a pouch made from the stomach of a young calf with fresh milk. He ties it to his saddle and sets off. The sun beats down, heating the pouch. The horse gallops, churning the milk inside. Hours later, thirsty and exhausted, the nomad opens the pouch, expecting a drink. Instead, he finds a watery liquid and white, solid clumps. He tastes the clumps. They are savory. They're filling. And crucially, they don't make him sick. The pouch, made from an animal's stomach, contained natural rennet, an enzyme used to digest milk. The combination of the rennet, the bacterial cultures native to the pouch, the heat of the sun, and the agitation of the galloping horse created the perfect conditions for curdling. The milk had separated into curds, cheese, and whey. This discovery, dated back to at least 8,000 BCE, allowed humans to transport protein without refrigeration. Technically, cheese is just milk that has been ruined in a very specific, controlled way. We are the only species on Earth that looks at a spoiled bodily fluid of another animal and says, "Let's age that for 6 months and put it on a cracker." Number 1. Leavened bread. Go back 10,000 years. Humans have just started growing grain, but eating it is a chore. They crush the kernels into a rough powder, mix it with water to form a dense paste, and cook it on hot rocks. The result is a rock-hard, tooth-shattering slab. It keeps you alive, but it's miserable. One day, in Egypt, a distracted baker mixes his grain paste but forgets about it. He leaves it sitting out in the warm sun for hours, maybe days. Invisible spores from the air attack the dough. When he finally returns, the dough has swollen and smells sour. He bakes it anyway to hide his mistake. The air was full of wild yeast spores. When they landed on the wet grain, they began to feed on the sugars, releasing carbon dioxide bubbles in the process. This fermentation caused the dough to rise. When the baker put this spoiled dough into the oven, the heat killed the yeast, but the pockets of air remained, creating a light, fluffy, airy loaf, the world's first leavened bread. We didn't invent bread. We formed a symbiotic relationship with a fungus. We feed the yeast, and the yeast makes our food edible. The entire foundation of Western civilization rests on a batch of dough that someone was too lazy to clean up.
But wait, I'm not letting you go without this one, because you're probably addicted to it right now. Extra credit. Coffee. According to legend, in the 9th century Ethiopia, a goat herd named Kaldi noticed something strange. His goats were acting insane. They were jumping, dancing, and bleating with an unnatural energy. He tracked them and found them eating bright red berries from a specific shrub. Curious, Kaldi tried the berries himself and felt a surge of alertness. He ran to a local monastery to share his discovery, but the monks, fearing this hyperactive devil fruit, threw the beans into the fire to destroy them. But as the beans burned, they didn't smell like brimstone. They smelled like heaven. The aroma of roasting coffee filled the room. The monks raked the roasted beans out of the fire, ground them up, and dissolved them in hot water. They realized this devil drink allowed them to stay awake during long hours of prayer without fatigue. It spread to the Arabian Peninsula, then to Europe, and eventually it fueled the Enlightenment. The biological reality? Caffeine is actually a natural pesticide produced by the plant to paralyze and kill insects that try to eat it. We're just so massy that instead of killing us, it just gives us the jitters. You are literally powering your workday with bug poison.
To it. Number 10. The Olmec Civilization. Imagine trekking through the dense, swampy jungles of Mexico's Gulf Coast. You stumble into a clearing and come face to face with a 10-foot-tall, 20-ton stone head. It's not a god, not a monster, but the portrait of a man carved with an eerie realism. This isn't a one-off discovery. 17 of these colossal heads have been found. They are the silent, brooding calling cards of Mesoamerica's mother culture, a civilization that rose, dominated, and vanished before Rome was even a village. Long before the Maya or the Aztecs, the Olmec flourished from around 1600 to 400 BCE. They were the architects of a cultural blueprint that would define the region for millennia. They likely invented the Mesoamerican ball game, practiced ritual bloodletting, and developed early forms of writing and calendar making. Their major centers, like San Lorenzo and Levanta, were hubs of immense power, capable of organizing the labor to quarry massive basalt boulders and transport them over 90 miles from the Tuxtlas Mountains. These weren't just lumps of rock. They were intricate portraits of mighty rulers, each with a unique helmet-like headdress. But around 900 BCE, San Lorenzo was abandoned and its monuments were systematically broken and buried. By 400 BCE, Levanta met a similar fate, and the Olmec simply faded from history.
The most compelling evidence for the Olmec's disappearance points not to an outside force, but to a violent internal implosion. The deliberate, targeted destruction of the colossal heads, portraits of their leaders, suggests a revolution, an uprising against the very power structures that defined them. Environmental changes, like rivers shifting course, may have weakened their rulers' authority, leading to their downfall. The Olmecs literally wrote the book on Mesoamerican civilization, but it seems their final chapter was on how to tear it all down from the inside. Number 9. The Moche civilization of Peru. In the arid deserts of northern Peru, a civilization arose that created some of the most lifelike art of the ancient world. Their ceramic artists were so skilled they could capture the subtle smirk of a warrior or the weary eyes of a chieftain in clay. You can stare into the face of a Moche lord who lived 1,500 years ago. Yet, for all their artistic realism, their demise was driven by a force of unimaginable, almost mythological power. The Moche thrived from about 100 to 800 AD along Peru's coast. They were master craftsmen, creating stunningly detailed pottery and pioneering sophisticated metalworking techniques. They were also monumental builders, constructing enormous adobe brick pyramids, or huacas, like the Huaca del Sol, which was the largest single pre-Columbian structure in the Americas. Their art reveals a complex society built on agricultural prowess, ritual combat, and human sacrifice, all governed by warrior priests. But the archaeological record shows a dramatic break. Evidence points to a cataclysmic climate event around 560 AD, a super El Niño that unleashed 3 decades of torrential rain and flooding, immediately followed by 3 decades of crippling drought. This 1-2 punch from the climate seems to be the killer. The mega-floods would have destroyed their irrigation systems and eroded their adobe temples, while the subsequent drought would have shattered their agricultural base. For a ruling class whose authority came from their perceived ability to mediate with the gods for good weather, this failure would have been absolute. Their art shows us their faces in intimate detail, but their ruins reveal their fate. What good is a perfect portrait when the sky itself has declared war on you? Number 8. The Greenland Vikings. In 982, a Viking named Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, went looking for new real estate. He found a vast icy wilderness and, in a stroke of marketing genius, named it Greenland to lure settlers. It worked. For nearly 500 years, a thriving colony of Norsemen survived and even flourished on the edge of the known world, building churches and trading with Europe. And then, the letters and supply ships just stopped arriving. The Greenland Norse established 2 main settlements, a larger eastern settlement and a smaller western settlement, with a peak population of several thousand. They were farmers and pastoralists, raising cattle and sheep and supplementing their diet by hunting caribou and walruses. They were fundamentally Europeans, building stone churches with bronze bells and striving to maintain a European life in an Arctic environment. But by the mid-1300s, the western settlement was abandoned. The last written record from the entire colony is of a wedding in the eastern settlement in 1408. When a ship finally arrived decades later, they found only empty farms and overgrown fields. The people were gone. The primary culprit was climate change. The world was sliding into the Little Ice Age, and Greenland got colder fast. Growing seasons shortened, and sea ice choked the shipping lanes to Europe. But there's another factor: their stubborn refusal to adapt. Unlike the local Inuit, the Norse never fully adopted technologies like the toggle harpoon for hunting seals, a crucial winter food source. They clung to their identity as European farmers until the bitter, frozen end. They weren't conquered. They just vanished. It's a chilling lesson in how a civilization can be frozen to death by a changing climate and its own inflexibility.
Number 7. The Rapa Nui of Easter Island. You're standing on the most remote inhabited place on Earth, a tiny volcanic triangle in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Your society's entire focus, your spiritual and political obsession, is carving, transporting, and erecting enormous stone figures. These multi-ton moai stare inland with blank eyes, their backs to the sea that brought your ancestors here. It's a monumental undertaking. But one day, the carving just stops, leaving hundreds of statues unfinished, as if the workers simply dropped their tools and walked away. The Rapa Nui people accomplished an engineering feat that is still debated today. They carved nearly 900 moai from hard volcanic tuff, some towering over 30 feet and weighing upwards of 80 tons. They then transported these behemoths miles across the island's rugged terrain to be placed on stone platforms called ahu. This required immense social organization, resources, and manpower. Yet the society that achieved this collapsed into chaos. Archaeological and paleobotanical evidence shows that the island, once covered in palm forests, was systematically stripped bare. This deforestation led to catastrophic soil erosion, the extinction of native plants and animals, and the inability to build ocean-going canoes for fishing or escape. Oral traditions and archaeological finds point to a dark turn: civil war, starvation, and even cannibalism. The most accepted theory is self-inflicted ecological suicide. In a competitive frenzy of clan-based statue building, the Rapa Nui consumed every last resource on their isolated island, sawing off the branch they were sitting on. The very symbols meant to project power and protect their people became the instruments of their destruction. It's a perfect, terrifying parable, but it begs a deeper question. What happens to a society when the very act of honoring its gods is precisely what damns it? Number 6. The Cahokia Nation. Picture North America in the year 1200. The largest, most sophisticated city isn't in Mexico or Central America. It's in modern-day Illinois, right across the river from St. Louis. It's a sprawling metropolis with a population larger than London's at the time, dominated by massive earthen pyramids. The grandest of these, a 4-terraced structure now called Monk's Mound, was taller than a 10-story building and covered more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And yet, by 1350, it was a ghost town. At its peak around 1100 AD, Cahokia was the center of the Mississippian culture, a civilization that spanned the American Midwest and Southeast. The city boasted a population of 15,000 to 20,000 people, with advanced urban planning, vast public plazas, and a series of large circular wood and post structures, dubbed woodhenges, that served as astronomical calendars. The construction of Monk's Mound alone would have required moving 22 million cubic feet of earth by hand in baskets. But then it all went wrong. By 1200, the population was in steep decline, and by 1350, the site was completely deserted, long before Europeans ever set foot in the region. The collapse was likely death by 1,000 cuts, but the wounds were self-inflicted. Evidence points to severe environmental degradation. The massive population clear-cut the surrounding forests for fuel and construction, leading to rampant erosion and localized flooding. A major flood on the Mississippi around 1150 seems to have been a tipping point, after which a massive defensive palisade was built around the city's core, suggesting rising social unrest. Cahokia is America's first great urban experiment, a story of a society that grew too big, too fast, and ultimately consumed its own foundation. Number 5. The Anasazi, ancestral Puebloans. Imagine living in a city built into the hollow of a sheer cliff face, hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. Your home is a fortress, accessible only by a series of hand and toe holds carved into the rock. It is one of the most secure and defensible positions imaginable.
You have thriving agriculture, a complex society, and stunning architecture. So why would you and 20,000 of your neighbors suddenly pack up and leave it all behind? The Anasazi of the ancestral Puebloans created some of the most spectacular architecture in North America. Between 900 and 1300 AD, they built the great houses of Chaco Canyon and the stunning cliff palaces of Mesa Verde. These multi-story, multi-room dwellings were masterpieces of masonry and astronomical alignment. Their society was supported by sophisticated irrigation systems, including dams and canals that made farming possible in an arid landscape. Yet, in the late 1200s, in a relatively short span of about 30 years, they systematically abandoned these magnificent, secure homes. They sealed doorways, left stores of grain, and simply walked away, migrating south and east to join other Pueblo groups. The smoking gun here is a megadrought. Tree ring data reveals a severe 24-year drought that struck the region in the late 13th century, crippling their agricultural systems. But it wasn't just the climate. Evidence of burned villages and unburied bodies suggests this environmental stress ignited intense internal conflict and warfare. Their cliffside fortresses became inescapable traps. They had built the ultimate defense against any threat from the outside. But how do you defend yourself when the sky turns against you and your enemy is your hungry neighbor?
Number 4. The Minoans on Crete. Imagine a Bronze Age civilization without walls. The Minoans on the island of Crete were Europe's first great civilization, a maritime superpower whose art depicted not scenes of war, but of leaping acrobats, playful dolphins, and vibrant nature. Their sprawling palace complexes, like the one at Knossos, were labyrinthian centers of art and trade, not military citadels. They were a seemingly peaceful and prosperous society that dominated the Aegean Sea. Then, in an instant, their world was torn apart by a real-life cataclysm of biblical proportions. Flourishing from roughly 3000 to 1100 BCE, the Minoans were a thalassocracy, an empire of the sea. Their location on Crete made them a hub for trade connecting mainland Greece, Egypt, and the Near East. Their palaces were unfortified, suggesting a dominance so complete they feared no rivals. But around 1600 BCE, the nearby volcanic island of Thera, now known as Santorini, erupted in one of the largest explosions in human history. The blast, orders of magnitude more powerful than Krakatoa, triggered a mega tsunami that slammed into the northern coast of Crete, obliterating ports and coastal settlements. The sky would have filled with ash, causing crop failures and plunging the region into darkness. Minoan civilization limped on, but it was a fatal blow. The eruption of Thera provides a clear, devastating explanation for the beginning of the Minoans' end. The subsequent chaos left them vulnerable to takeover by the more militaristic Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The Minoans were a superpower, the masters of their known world, brought to their knees not by an invading army or political collapse, but by a geological hiccup. It's a stark reminder of how even the most sophisticated societies are ultimately at the mercy of the planet's violent, unpredictable power. Number 3. The Khmer Empire, Angkor. In the jungles of Cambodia lies a stone city that at its peak was the largest urban center on Earth. Angkor, the capital of the Khmer Empire, was an architectural marvel, a hydraulic engineering masterpiece, and a cosmic representation of the Hindu universe. Its central temple, Angkor Wat, remains the largest religious monument in the world. For 600 years, this empire dominated Southeast Asia. But at its heart, this magnificent city failed, and the jungle swallowed it whole. From the 9th to the 15th centuries, the Khmer Empire reigned. The key to its power was an astonishingly complex water management system. A vast network of canals, reservoirs, and massive man-made lakes, called barays, controlled the monsoon rains.
This system irrigated rice paddies, providing up to 3 harvests a year, which in turn supported a population of nearly 1 million people in the city of Angkor. The empire's wealth built over 1,000 temples, including the breathtaking Angkor Wat. But by the late 13th century, this intricate system began to fail. Construction ceased, and the empire entered a terminal decline, abandoning its grand capital. Ironically, the very system that gave Angkor life was also its fatal flaw. New climate data shows the region was hit by a series of prolonged, intense droughts in the 13th and 14th centuries, followed by periods of torrential monsoons. This climatic whiplash would have been disastrous for their finely tuned water network, causing it to break down and fail. The Khmer engineered a paradise on Earth, a perfect machine for harnessing nature. But what happens when the very heavens you worship turn against your creation? Number 2. The Indus Valley Civilization. In what is now Pakistan and India, one of the 3 cradles of civilization emerged alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia. But this one was different. It was larger than both of them combined, with a population of up to 5 million people. Its cities were marvels of urban planning, with grid-like streets and the world's first known sanitation systems. Yet for all its sophistication, we don't know what their people called themselves, what their rulers' names were, or what gods they worshipped. Because after 700 years of flourishing, they vanished, leaving behind a script we still cannot read. The Indus Valley, or Harappan civilization, thrived from about 2600 to 1900 BCE. Its cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were astonishingly advanced. They featured meticulously planned streets, standardized baked bricks, and elaborate water management with private wells and covered drainage systems in many homes. There is a conspicuous lack of monumental palaces or temples, suggesting a more egalitarian social structure. They had extensive trade networks reaching as far as Mesopotamia. But around 1900 BCE, the cities began to decline. Trade halted, the standardized weights and measures fell out of use, and the great cities were slowly abandoned. Most tantalizingly, their beautiful script, found on thousands of small stone seals, remains completely undeciphered. The leading theory points to gradual, irreversible climate change. A shift in monsoon patterns slowly dried up the Ghaggar-Hakra River, a vital water source for the civilization's heartland. This environmental shift would have crippled their agricultural base, forcing a gradual migration to smaller, more rural settlements. The decline wasn't a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, quiet fading. And so we're left with the ultimate mystery, the Silent Seals. The answers to who they were and what they believed are locked away in a language of symbols we can't comprehend. The final secret of a civilization that wrote its own ending, but in a language the rest of the world has forgotten how to read.
Number 1. The Maya civilization. Imagine a civilization of geniuses. In the heart of the Mesoamerican jungle, they built towering pyramids that dwarfed any structure in Europe at the time. They developed the concept of the number 0 independently, tracked the movement of Venus with terrifying accuracy, and created a calendar more precise than the one we use today. They could predict celestial events centuries into the future. And yet, in the 9th century AD, they couldn't see what was coming for them. One by one, their great southern cities fell silent. During its classic period, from roughly 250 to 900 AD, the Maya civilization was a network of powerful city-states like Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul. These weren't peaceful scholarly centers, as once believed, but warring kingdoms obsessed with ritual and legacy, recorded in an intricate hieroglyphic script. They were masters of mathematics and astronomy, using their knowledge to build and orient their monumental architecture. Then, in the southern lowlands, it all stopped. Inscriptions and monuments ceased to be carved, the grand temples and palaces fell into disrepair, and the jungle began to reclaim what had been the most advanced civilization in the Americas. By 900 AD, this heartland of Maya culture was largely abandoned. There was no single cause for the collapse, but a perfect storm of them. Endemic warfare between the city-states exhausted resources and populations. Overpopulation led to massive deforestation and soil erosion. All of this was then exacerbated by a series of severe, prolonged droughts, which crippled their agricultural systems and undermined the authority of their divine kings. It was a slow, agonizing death spiral. The Maya could read the stars with stunning clarity, but they couldn't read the catastrophic future they were writing for themselves right here on Earth.
You're here because you know that brilliance often looks like a mistake until someone is smart enough to see the potential. If you want to be smarter than the person sitting next to you, hit that subscribe button. Then I want to see you prove your worth in the comments. Pick one accident from this list, whether it's the gunpowder that kills us or the coffee that wakes us up, and build a case for why it is the single most critical event in human history. The floor is yours. Class dismissed.